Mary Michaels took the stand on behalf of her son, Paul. She trained her eyes on the state's attorney.
I mean, I have enough to worry about when I go to bed at night about my son and my family. I don't need to worry that this treatment's going to be taken away.
What do you think might happen if... Oh, never mind. I have no other questions.
For all I know, the kid may still be alive.
The tumors will grow, they will lose the vision, they will be paralyzed, and they will die, because there's nothing in the world which can be used to save this patient's life.
You intend to continue doing just what you've been doing until somebody is able to stop you. Is that not true?
I'm going to do what the law will allow me to do, Mr. Helcom. I do whatever is necessary to bring my medicines to approval in the United States and everywhere in the world, and bring you to justice for causing the death of 200 patients. And we will come back here to haunt you until we are dead.
Are you threatening me, Dr. Burzynski?
I'm not threatening you, but that's what's going to happen in the future.
Well, I think that's something that'll remains to be seen.
They weren't real happy with me. I could tell that from the way they were talking to me and asking questions. Then they told me after they were going to rewrite my proposal for decision and take adverse action against Dr. Burzynski, and I said I thought that was rather foolish.
The state of Texas wants Houston doctor Stanislaw Burzynski to stop treating his patients with drugs he produces at his own pharmaceutical plant. The drugs, called anti-neoplastons, are non-toxic compounds of proteins and amino acids, often lacking in cancer patients. Even though the state of Texas acknowledges that the drugs may be helping some who are terminally ill, the state says the drugs shouldn't be used. This is the State Board of Medical Examiners, which licenses doctors in Texas. This is the agency challenging Dr. Burzynski in court. One judge has already told the board members that they don't have a case.
All of this nonsense which is going now should disappear, because they should realize that I am right, okay? They're fighting losing battle. I am saving human lives, and if they put me out of business, the people will die.
This is the brain of an 8-year-old boy with a huge tumor most thought would kill him. He used Dr. Burzynski's drug. Images of his skull taken 6 years later show the tumor has almost disappeared.
Dr. Bruce Cohen is the director of neurologic oncology at the prestigious Cleveland Clinic.
The only explanation is that it shrunk because of the therapy Paul has received.
He confirmed Dr. Burzynski's results on Paul.
7 years that we've had Paul, and he's been healthy, and I owe it to this man. And there's no way that I'd ever be able to thank him enough for what he's done for us.
Today, that boy, Paul Michaels, and his anxious family sit in the courtroom with other patients.
Undeterred by the 1993 ruling, the Texas Medical Board took Dr. Burzynski to a higher district court. Of course, this time, they knew they couldn't raise any issues about whether or not his treatment was effective.
The Texas State Board of Medical Examiners, which has fought to suspend Dr. Burzynski's license because his treatments have never been approved, says, quote, the efficacy of anti-neoplastons in the treatment of human cancers is not of issue in these proceedings.
It takes a bureaucrat to come up with that idea, because a layman, that would really be the question.
Well, Dr. Burzynski has won his latest round in court. The medical examiner's order was reversed, but that is not expected to be the end of his trouble with the state of Texas.
The Texas Medical Board took this case all the way to the Texas State Supreme Court, leaving the Texas Medical Board completely unsuccessful in their efforts to remove his medical license. So, if efficacy was not an issue and Dr. Burzynski wasn't breaking any laws, then why would the Texas Medical Board continue on with this empty pursuit? Well, it was eventually realized, even by the mainstream press, that the Food and Drug Administration had been pressuring the Texas Medical Board to continue trying to take away Dr. Burzynski's medical license.
For this story, we wanted to talk to the FDA about its policies and procedures. The agency did agree to talk to us on background where it wouldn't be quoted, but it repeatedly refused our requests for on-camera interviews.
While they were busy pressuring the Texas State Medical Board to try to revoke Dr. Burzynski's medical license, they were even busier trying to revoke Dr. Burzynski completely from society by trying to place him in prison. On March 12, 1976, FDA Bureau of Drugs Director Richard Kraut states in the cancer letter, when anyone other than large institutions ask permission to conduct clinical trials, you want harsh regulations. Sometimes we say it is proper to hinder research. And once these guidelines were adopted, the FDA would consider itself bound by them. In 1982, Kraut states again, I never have and never will approve a new drug to an individual, but only to a large pharmaceutical firm with unlimited finances. And so, the fiercest fight in FDA history began.
Dr. Burzynski's dealings with the FDA commenced in 1983. At that point, the FDA commenced a civil action to try to close the clinic and stop all patients from receiving the medicine.
Before the judge in this case had announced her ruling, the FDA sent her a letter warning her in advance, if this court declines to grant the injunction sought by the government, thus permitting continued manufacture and distribution of anti-neoplastones, the government would then be obliged to pursue other less efficient remedies, such as actions for seizure, also known as raiding his clinic and home, and condemnation of the drugs, also known as a propaganda campaign, or criminal prosecution of individuals, also known as throwing Dr. Burzynski in prison. Regardless of these threats from the FDA,
the judge in the case basically said that he can treat anybody he wants in Texas, but he can't ship his medicine in interstate commerce. The FDA viewed that as a failure and told Dr. Burzynski's at the time, his attorneys at the time, that they have other ways to get him. Let's talk about the other ways. In 1985, the FDA convened a grand jury to hear evidence to try to indict Dr. Burzynski. In connection with that, they had a raid of his clinic where they seized 200,000 pieces of paper, including all of his medical records of all patients. A little difficult to practice medicine when you don't have medical records.
Obviously, they came out and they confiscated all of our medical records. And it took us about 12 years or 14 years to recover these medical records. In the meantime, we are permitted to make copies of the medical records in their office, but it was also the neglect of human well-being. We are treating very sick people. They took medical records, and we needed these medical records to really fight for the lives of these patients, but they took this away. They didn't care for these patients. The patients could die. They were not important.
They presented the evidence to the grand jury, no indictment. 1986, they come back, seize another 100,000 documents, no indictment.
I just have real trouble in knowing how much pain and what people go through with cancer. And since 1967, you've been saying, I can take care of that, and people are going, forget it, don't pay any attention, and you've gone outside the country and they say fine, and here we say no. Are we that backward, doctor?
Yes.
Well,
What do you mean? Yes. Are we that backward?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that there's a big gap between people's pain and suffering and what the powers that be are willing to accept, to give, to be able to treat. It's difficult for doctors to belie 10, 12 years of training and go against that and believe that some guy from Houston has come up with something.
Isn't part of your problem that the treatment of cancer is a very profitable industry for a lot of companies, and that your treatment right now will eat into those companies' profits? And
Bingo.
they'll do anything.
I think that there are the people who give the chemotherapy and people like that, and the drug companies would have a very good reason for not helping you out.
I would disagree with that from the standpoint that, as Dr. Burzynski's pointed out himself, the patients he's treating are patients who are not currently eligible for chemotherapy or radiation. If we were to find a new drug that had a high cure rate of cancer, it would give us the opportunity to treat many patients in whom we don't have potentially effective therapies now.
1990, another grand jury, either the second or the third. They present more documents. Dr. Burzynski testifies extensively before the grand jury, no indictment. 1991 to 1993. FDA investigates Dr. Burzynski. We don't know if evidence was presented to another grand jury. 1994, another grand jury. No indictment. 1995, another grand jury. This grand jury started in March of this year. On March 25th, I believe, it was Dr. Burzynski, along with a few of his patients, appeared on CBS show This Morning.
Let me play devil's advocate. Here you all, very desperate folk, had undergone some cancer treatment, correct?
No.
None at all for you?
I
None
had
at all
no
for you?
treatment.
Let me go after these guys then for a second. Had undergone some treatment. Could it not have been that the treatment that you received prior to Dr. Burzynski's treatment was what, in fact, really cured you?
Well, I'll jump on that. No way, because the recurrence I had was in a brand new spot that had not been involved before. So if all the punishment that I went through for the year went out of my system, and after it went out of my system, all of a sudden a new tumor comes in, how could that first treatment have helped the subsequent tumor?
Later that day, the FDA came, another raid, more patient documents, more subpoenas.
We were flooded with calls last Friday with people wanting to know how to get a hold of you. They're going to see this story this morning, see that you've been raided by the FDA, and they're going to want to know if you're for real or if the concerns of the FDA may have something to do with your treatments and the viability of your treatments.
Well, I don't think, let me jump in here. I don't think there's really an issue, as I mentioned, regarding the safety of the drug, and the FDA isn't contending at this point that the drug doesn't work. The only issue is that according to the FDA, it has not been proven by controlled clinical trials. So at least in terms of safety, the FDA isn't saying that it's not safe, and the FDA isn't even saying that it doesn't work. Right now, they're just contesting, or apparently they're contesting, whether Dr. Burzynski himself has been shipping the medicine out of state, which in some respects is quite ridiculous since he has approval to ship the medicine out of state to various cancer institutions around the country. He ships it out of the country to various countries because it's being used in other places, and he ships it to individuals who have been granted permission by the FDA to receive the medicine under what's called a compassionate use INDs.
Okay.
May, June, and July, more witnesses testified before the grand jury, more documents. So we've had now 4, 5, or 6 grand juries. Let me talk about the subpoena practices. Most recently, the FDA has now subpoenaed the medical records of every patient who has gone on TV and told their story about Dr. Burzynski. We'll let the committee judge what they think of that. We talk about dissemination of false information by the FDA. 1985, FDA tells anyone who calls and inquiring about Dr. Burzynski that he's being criminally investigated. When the judge on the case found out about that, he issued a cease and desist and a strong reprimand against that. The FDA now has refined this tactic. Instead of waiting for people to call up the FDA, what they've done is subpoena all the records from Dr. Burzynski about his business associates and all the researchers around the world, and there are many of them who are researching anti-neoplastons, his therapy. Now what they're doing is systematically contacting everyone who does business with him, who may do business with him, and telling about the grand jury investigation, subpoenaing documents. I believe that they're doing this in order to make the FDA, to make it more difficult for him to do business. I'd like the following questions to be asked the FDA. How much money have they spent in the last 10 years to try to put Dr. Burzynski out of business? How many documents can they subpoena, and how many more grand juries does he have to go to? And why can't patients who have advanced cancer seek the medical treatment of their choice?
Upon the commencement of the FDA's 1995 grand jury against Dr. Burzynski, an oversight and investigation subcommittee was organized by Congressman Joe Barton in an attempt to intervene in the FDA's relentless harassment of Dr. Burzynski and his patients.
In my opinion, you have every right to use the investigative authority and the judicial resources of the federal government through the Justice Department to convene a grand jury. That's very appropriate. The first time, perhaps even the second time. It becomes questionable the third time, the fourth time, and the fifth time. It is not, I think, an unlogical conclusion to think that the FDA has a vendetta against Dr. Burzynski or wants to retaliate for some reason. Now, that's my opinion. How many grand jury investigations have to occur that result in no finding of fault before you, as commissioner of the FDA, would encourage those within your organization to cease and desist?
Mr. Chairman, how do you know that there were no findings of fault that were returned from that grand jury?
There have been no indictments returned.
Mr. Chairman, I ask counsel to comment, but I don't think those are the same. As a matter of law, those are the same things.
I'm baffled by the splitting of hairs here, but
I'm just trying to understand the exchange between the witness and the chairman. What I understood the chairman to say is that there have been 4 grand juries convened?
At least 4.
I just am left then with a rather strong inference that if you convene 4 separate grand juries and there's no indictment returned, notwithstanding that prosecutors tell us always that it's possible to indict a ham sandwich, that probably there's not much there.
Dozens of Dr. Burzynski's patients who had traveled to Washington, D.C. from all corners of the United States stood up and expressed their outrage with the FDA and Commissioner David Kessler.
The FDA has made a list and decided who can live and who will die. I guess I didn't make that list.
I've had no chemotherapy. I've had no radiation. I chose Dr. Burzynski instead after a lot of research and a lot of searching. I've been in remission since 1989. Dr. Kessler, I'm not a statistic.
We're frustrated. Their rights, constitutional rights, have been violated. This has got to end. My children are asking me, Daddy, what does the future hold? My one daughter wrote a letter to the president of this country and said, please don't pull the plug on my daddy. And that just broke my heart and broke my wife's heart.
My husband is a walking miracle. 16 months ago, the doctors told us there's nothing else they can do, and they told us to enjoy what little life he had left. Look at him. He biked 32 miles after being on Dr. Burzynski's treatment for 2 months, and they're saying we can't have it?
I have a report from my family physician which tells how well I am doing. My tumors are leaving my body, and my condition is improving every day. Now the FDA is saying to me, no, your doctor is a criminal, he should be put in jail, and he needs to be shut down.
This is criminal. I want the FDA to get out of our lives and stay out of her doctor-patient relationship.
What the classical conventional medicine had to do for me was nothing. For me, the next thing was the minister. I did not want to undergo chemotherapy, which I had a new name for, chemotherapy, or any type of radiation. I was extremely lucky I found Dr. Burzynski, and I don't want the FDA to take this right from me. I came 18 years ago from communist Romania, and the tyrannous dictator Ceausescu never stopped a doctor from treating anybody. How can we have something like this in the United States?
Barely a week after these hearings, on November 20th, 1995, Dr. Stanislaw Burzynski was indicted. Burzynski was charged with 75 counts of violating federal law and fraud. If convicted, Burzynski would face a maximum of 290 years in a federal prison and $18.5 million in fines. Not to mention what would happen to his patients.
He is their last chance for life, but now the federal government is issuing a death sentence for the patients of this cancer doctor.
On February 9th, Houston federal court judge Sim Lake ruled Dr. Burzynski's treatments have been, quote, illegal under Texas and federal law since 1984, and he ordered them stopped on all but a handful of patients. Then he put a stay on his own order, a stay of execution.
I believe that most of these 300 people will die within a short period of time if the treatment is stopped.
In 1996, not only did scores of Dr. Burzynski's patients return to Washington, D.C. to protest his indictment, but many of them testified again before another congressional hearing headed by Congressman Joe Barton.
First witness is Marianne Canary, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
From Aurora, Minnesota.
This is Dustin Canary, and he is on Dr. Burzynski's anti-neoplastin treatment. This is my husband, Jack Canary. Now, in February of 1994, our lives were drastically changed. My son Dustin was only 2.5 years old at the time. He was diagnosed with a brain tumor the size of a golf ball. The surgeon removed 75% of his tumor, and the remaining 25% was diagnosed from a biopsy as a malignant, very aggressive medulloblastoma brain tumor, one of the most deadly forms of brain cancer. The doctors told us Dustin had only a few months to live. The first treatment offered us was radiation, but the radiation doctor told us that at his young age, Dustin would become a vegetable, and it would only extend his life for maybe a few months. The next doctor wanted us to enroll Dustin in a experimental chemotherapy, which was highly toxic. The side effects would include hearing loss, kidney and liver damage, bladder, stunted growth, and a possible leukemia. One question I would like to ask is, would you do that to your child? We weighed the harm these experimental drugs would cause against the fact that they would not cure Dustin, and decided not to subject him to these drastic measures. But our oncologist told us that their opinion took precedence over us as parents. This put added stress to the already stressful situation we were in. In April of 1994, we visited Dr. Stanislaw Burzynski in Houston. Dr. Burzynski made us no promises, but said that he often had very good results with brain tumors. At worst, it would not hurt Dustin, and it offered the best hope and a longer quality of life. An MRI 6 weeks after we started Dr. Burzynski's treatment revealed no tumor. We were very overjoyed. Dustin continued anti-neoplastin therapy, and 1 year later, a tumor 1 inch by 1 inch in size was found on the MRI. That would be April of 1995. Dr. Burzynski immediately raised Dustin's dose of anti-neoplastins. There were still no harsh side effects at all. The next MRI in September of 1995 revealed that the tumor had almost disappeared again. To this day, it has not reappeared. If you look at Dustin right now, he is a happy, healthy 4-year-old who has outlived his prognosis. There is no traditional treatment that would have kept him alive with such good quality of life. FDA Commissioner David Kessler loves to grab headlines as a man who loves children so much. He wants to protect them from the ravages of smoking. If Dr. Kessler loves children so much, why have he and his agencies been trying so hard to cut off my son's last hope for life? Without this treatment, my son will die.
This is a photo of Dustin Canary at 4 years old in 1996. This is a photo of Dustin Canary at 22 years old in 2013, happily married. And this is a photo of Dustin Canary today, paying it forward by helping to save the lives of others as a firefighter and paramedic.